Picture a stretch of highway isolated between the crashing waves of the Atlantic Ocean and the shallow, murky waters of the Great South Bay. This is Ocean Parkway, located on the southern coast of Long Island, New York. In the summer, it is a picturesque drive for tourists heading to the beach. But in the winter, it is a desolate, windswept wasteland of dense bramble, poison ivy, and twisted pine trees. For over a decade, this 15-mile stretch of road held a secret so dark, it would launch one of the largest and most frustrating manhunts in American history. Welcome to Case 404. Today, we are opening the files on the Long Island serial killer. But this is not just a story about the nameless terror that haunted the shores of New York. This is the story of a monster hiding in plain sight. A man who built skyscrapers in Manhattan by day, and hunted vulnerable women by night. This is the chilling double life of Rex Heuermann, the Gilgo Beach architect. Prepare yourself, because the truth of how long he got away with it, and how close he was to all of us, will keep you awake at night. To understand the sheer scale of this nightmare, we have to go back to the beginning. The unraveling of Rex Heuermann's secret life didn't begin with a brilliant stroke of detective work. It began with an accident. It began with a frantic, terrifying 911 call from a woman running for her life. It was May 1, 2010. A 24-year-old woman named Shannon Gilbert traveled from Manhattan to the quiet, gated community of Oak Beach, Long Island, to meet a client. Shannon was an escort who advertised her services on Craigslist. Sometime in the early morning hours, something went horribly wrong inside that house. At 4:51 a.m., Shannon called 911. The recording of that call is one of the most haunting pieces of audio in criminal history. For 23 minutes, Shannon stayed on the line with dispatchers, screaming, hiding, and repeating a chilling phrase, "They are trying to kill me. They are trying to kill me." Shannon fled the house, banging on the doors of neighboring homes in the darkness, begging for help. Some neighbors called the police, but by the time authorities arrived at the Oak Beach community, Shannon had vanished into the thick, impenetrable marshland. She was gone. Months passed. Shannon's family relentlessly pressured the Suffolk County Police Department to search for her. They refused to let her case go cold. Finally, in December 2010, 7 months after she disappeared, the police decided to conduct a massive sweep of the brush along Ocean Parkway, a few miles west of where Shannon was last seen. On December 11, 2010, Suffolk County Police Officer John Malia and his K-9 partner, a rescue dog named Blue, were pushing through the dense, thorny thickets near Gilgo Beach. The environment was brutal. The brush was so thick you could barely see 10 feet in front of you. Suddenly, the dog alerted. Officer Malia approached the spot and saw something unnatural in the dirt. It was a burlap sack. A weathered, rotting burlap sack, precisely tied and hidden. Inside, they found the skeletal remains of a young woman. The police immediately assumed they had found Shannon Gilbert. But dental records proved them wrong. The body belonged to someone else. It belonged to Melissa Barthelemy, a 24-year-old woman who had vanished in 2009. The discovery sent shockwaves through the department. If this wasn't Shannon Gilbert, then who else was out there? The next day, the search intensified. And what they found transformed a missing persons case into a full-scale serial killer investigation. On December 13, 2010, just a few hundred feet from where Melissa was found, searchers discovered another body wrapped in burlap. Then, they found a third. And then, a fourth. 4 bodies, all women, all wrapped in identical burlap hunting blinds, buried exactly 500 feet apart in a straight line, parallel to the highway. It was a graveyard hiding in plain sight. The media dubbed them the Gilgo Four. They were Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Lynn Costello, and Maureen Brainerd Barnes. All 4 women shared a tragic and specific profile. They were all in their 20s. They were all petite. They all had green or hazel eyes. And they all worked as escorts advertising on Craigslist and other online forums. The killer had a type. He had a hunting ground. And he had a perfectly orchestrated disposal method. The FBI profilers were brought in, and they painted a terrifying picture. The suspect was likely a white male, highly intelligent, meticulous, and completely devoid of empathy. He was someone who felt comfortable on the south shore of Long Island, someone who owned a truck or SUV to transport the bodies, and someone with access to burlap sacks. But the most disturbing part of the FBI profile was his psychological need for control. This killer didn't just want to take a life, he wanted to terrorize the families left behind. In the summer of 2009, shortly after Melissa Barthelemy disappeared, her teenage sister, Amanda, received a phone call. The caller ID showed Melissa's phone number. Amanda answered, hoping to hear her sister's voice. Instead, she heard the voice of a man. The man was calm. He was taunting. He asked Amanda if she was a whore like her sister. Over the next 6 weeks, the killer called Amanda multiple times using Melissa's cell phone. He told her horrifying details about what he had done to her sister. The police immediately traced the pings from the cell phone towers. They expected the signals to come from a dark basement or a remote cabin. Instead, the results were baffling. The killer was making these calls from the most crowded, heavily surveilled areas on the planet. He called from Madison Square Garden. He called from Times Square. He called from the bustling platforms of Penn Station in the heart of Manhattan. He was hiding in the crowd. He was a ghost walking among millions of commuters. By the time police rushed to the location of the cell phone ping, the killer had simply tossed the burner phone into a trash can and melted into the sea of people. He knew exactly how law enforcement technology worked. He was always one step ahead. As the years dragged on, the mystery deepened. Between 2011 and 2012, police expanded their search of Ocean Parkway. What they found shattered any hope of a quick resolution. They didn't just find the Gilgo Four. They found more remains. The dismembered bodies of Jessica Taylor and a woman known only as Peaches. They found the remains of a female toddler. They found the remains of an Asian male wearing women's clothing. In total, the remains of 11 people were pulled from the brush along the highway. Ultimately, Shannon Gilbert's remains were also found in the marsh, though police initially claimed her death was an accidental drowning, a theory her family and private pathologists vehemently contested. The Gilgo Beach serial killer case became the biggest unsolved murder mystery in modern New York history. For over 13 years, the families of the victims lived in agonizing limbo. The case was plagued by massive corruption within the Suffolk County Police Department. The local police chief, James Burke, actively blocked the FBI from joining the investigation, refusing their advanced technology and profiling tools. It was later revealed that Burke himself was involved in dark, illegal activities, leading to his own arrest and imprisonment. While the police department fought itself, the killer walked free. He went to work. He ate dinner with his family. He smiled at his neighbors. He felt untouchable. He believed he had committed the perfect crimes. But he made a mistake. A tiny, seemingly insignificant mistake that would sit in a police database for over a decade, waiting for someone to finally connect the dots. In 2022, everything changed. A new police commissioner, Rodney Harrison, took over the Suffolk County Police Department. He was horrified that the Gilgo Beach case had been gathering dust. Harrison immediately formed a brand new, highly secretive multi-agency task force. He brought together the FBI, state troopers, and elite homicide detectives. Their mission was simple: go back to day one. Re-examine every single piece of evidence, every witness statement, and every tip, using the newest technology available. They started with a piece of information that had been buried in the file since 2010. During the investigation into the disappearance of Amber Lynn Costello, the fourth victim, police interviewed a man who lived with her. This roommate told police a crucial detail. On the night Amber disappeared, a client had come to the house. The roommate described the man as a large, hulking figure, wearing thick glasses, with dark, messy hair. And most importantly, the roommate remembered the car the man was driving. It was a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche. Dark green. For 12 years, that vehicle description sat in the evidence box. But in March 2022, the new task force decided to run a massive, comprehensive search through a New York State database. They looked for every single dark-colored Chevrolet Avalanche registered in the area at the time of the murders. The computer generated a list. The detectives began filtering the names, matching them against the FBI profile. They looked for a white male, living near the south shore of Long Island, who matched the physical description of the hulking man with glasses. The list shrank. Until finally, one name stood out from the rest. A name that no one in the police department had ever heard before. The name was Rex Heuermann. He lived in Massapequa Park, just a 15-minute drive across the bridge from where the bodies were buried at Gilgo Beach. The task force pulled up his driver's license photo. He was 6'4", over 240 pounds, with dark hair and thick glasses. He was an exact match to the witness description. The detectives then looked at his occupation. Rex Heuermann wasn't a drifter. He wasn't an unemployed outcast. He was a highly successful, licensed architect. And his firm, RH Consultants and Associates, was located on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, right next to Penn Station and Times Square, the exact locations from which the taunting phone calls were made to Melissa Barthelemy's teenage sister over a decade ago. The pieces of the puzzle were terrifyingly perfect. But knowing he was the killer and proving it in a court of law were two completely different things. The task force knew they couldn't just arrest him. If they spooked him, he could destroy the evidence, or worse, he could kill again. They needed DNA. They needed digital forensics. They needed to tear his double life apart piece by piece without him ever knowing they were watching his every move. And so began a year-long, high-stakes game of cat and mouse, where elite detectives hunted the ultimate predator through the concrete jungle of New York City. The year is 2022. The Gilgo Beach Task Force has a name, Rex Heuermann. They have a physical description. They have his address in Massapequa Park, and they know he works as an architect in the heart of Manhattan. But the detectives know that simply knocking on his door would be a catastrophic mistake. Heuermann is highly intelligent. He has evaded the FBI and local police for over a decade. If they alert him to their suspicion, he could destroy vital evidence, wipe his hard drives, or worse, he could realize the walls are closing in and decide to take another victim. They needed to build an invisible cage around him. They needed to watch him live his double life, documenting every single move he made without him ever suspecting a thing. The operation was entirely covert. They began with his digital footprint, and what they uncovered was a masterclass in calculated, predatory behavior. Investigators issued over 300 subpoenas, demanding records from cell phone companies, internet providers, and online platforms like Tinder and Craigslist. They wanted to understand the digital architecture of the Gilgo Beach killer. For years, the police knew that the killer used prepaid burner phones to contact his victims. These are untraceable cell phones bought with cash, meant to be thrown away after a crime. When the victims, Melissa, Megan, Amber, and Maureen, disappeared, the killer had called them using these specific burner phones. He also used a separate burner phone to make the sadistic, taunting calls to Melissa Barthelomy's teenage sister in 2009. For over 10 years, the police possessed the records of those phone calls, but without a suspect, the numbers meant nothing. Now, they had Rex Heuermann. The detectives created a digital map. They took the cell tower data from the killer's burner phones used between 2009 and 2010. Every time the killer turned on a burner phone, it connected to a cell tower, creating a geographical ping. The task force then took Rex Heuermann's personal, legitimate cell phone data and laid it right over the top. The overlap was terrifying. When the killer's burner phones pinged off cell towers in Massapequa Park, Long Island, Rex Heuermann's personal phone was sitting in the exact same location. When the killer took the train into the city and the burner phones pinged off towers in Midtown Manhattan near Penn Station, Rex Heuermann's personal phone was pinging right next to it, right by his architectural firm on Fifth Avenue. The Venn diagram of the Gilgo Beach killer and Rex Heuermann was a perfect, undeniably identical circle. But the geographical data wasn't the only piece of the puzzle falling into place. The detectives needed to explain how a married man with 2 children could commit such horrific atrocities in his own home without his family noticing. They pulled the travel records, credit card receipts, and flight manifests for Rex Heuermann's wife, Asa Ellerup. What they discovered sent chills down their spines. In July 2009, when Melissa Bartholomew went missing, Heuermann's wife and children were out of the state, vacationing in Iceland. In June 2010, when Megan Waterman disappeared, his family was hundreds of miles away in Maryland. In September 2010, when Amber Lynn Costello was lured to her death, his family was out of town in New Jersey. Every single time a woman vanished, Rex Heuermann was sitting alone in his dark, cluttered house in Massapequa Park. The murders were not impulsive crimes of passion. They were highly organized, deeply premeditated hunting expeditions. He waited for his house to be empty, and then, the architect transformed into the monster. As the surveillance continued into 2023, the task force tapped into his current internet activity. If they thought his past was dark, his present was an absolute nightmare. Behind his office desk, while reviewing blueprints and taking meetings with wealthy Manhattan developers, Rex Heuermann was living a secret, grotesque online existence. Using fake names like Thomas and using a fresh batch of burner phones, Heuermann created multiple accounts on dating apps like Tinder to contact sex workers. But it was his search history that revealed the true depth of his depravity. Between March 2022 and his eventual arrest, Heuermann conducted over 200 distinct searches related to the Gilgo Beach investigation. He was actively monitoring the police. He searched phrases like, "Why hasn't the Long Island serial killer been caught?" and "new phone technology used by police." He searched for documentaries and podcasts about his own crimes. He obsessively searched for photos of the victims, their families, and the very detectives who were hunting him. Alongside these investigative queries, he was searching for violent, graphic pornography, specifically seeking out material involving the torture, starvation, and brutalization of women. The digital evidence painted a portrait of a man obsessed with his own mythology, a predator who relished the pain he had caused and felt utterly invincible. Yet, digital evidence is circumstantial. A defense attorney could argue that a lot of people search for true crime content. They could argue that cell phone towers cover large areas, and the pings were just a coincidence. To put Rex Heuermann behind bars for the rest of his life, the task force needed the holy grail of forensic evidence. They needed a physical, biological link between Heuermann and the rotting burlap sacks buried on Gilgo Beach. They needed his DNA. Back in 2010, when the bodies of the Gilgo Four were discovered, forensic investigators carefully examined the burlap sacks and the tape used to bind the victims. Amidst the decay, they found a few strands of hair. Crucially, they found a single, degraded male hair on the burlap wrapped around Megan Waterman's body. At the time, DNA technology was not advanced enough to extract a profile from a hair without the root attached. For over a decade, that hair sat in a climate-controlled evidence locker. But by 2022, science had finally caught up. Using advanced mitochondrial DNA testing, the laboratory was able to extract a partial profile from that single male hair. Now, the police just needed Rex Heuermann to leave a piece of himself behind. In January 2023, the surveillance team was tailing Heuermann through the freezing streets of Manhattan. They watched him leave his architectural firm. He was a massive, imposing figure, wearing a dark suit, carrying his briefcase, blending seamlessly into the rushing crowds of New York commuters. He stopped at a local pizzeria. The undercover detectives watched closely as he bought a slice of pizza. He stood on the sidewalk, eating it as he walked. When he finished, he crumpled up the paper plate, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and tossed the remaining, half-eaten pizza crust into a public trash can on Fifth Avenue. He then turned and walked down the subway steps, disappearing into the underground. The moment he was out of sight, an undercover detective casually walked up to the trash can, reached inside, and retrieved the discarded pizza crust. It was placed into a sterile evidence bag and rushed to the Suffolk County Crime Lab. The tension in the task force headquarters was suffocating. If the DNA didn't match, their prime suspect would walk away, and the investigation would be back to square one. Days passed as the forensic scientists worked around the clock, extracting the saliva from the crust and comparing it to the profile from the male hair found on the burlap sack 13 years earlier. Finally, the results came back. It was a match. The DNA from the pizza crust belonged to the same man who had left a hair on the body of Megan Waterman. Rex Heuermann, the quiet, successful architect from Massapequa Park, was the Gilgo Beach serial killer. The invisible cage was now fully locked. But the danger was far from over. They had their evidence, but taking down a man of his size, intelligence, and potential violence in the middle of New York City required absolute precision. They couldn't afford a shootout or a hostage situation. It was time to pull the trigger on the operation. It was time to bring the monster into the light. It is the evening of Thursday, July 13, 2023. Midtown Manhattan is sweltering under the intense summer heat. The streets are packed with thousands of tourists, office workers, and commuters rushing toward Penn Station. Among them is Rex Heuermann, the imposing, 6'4" architect. He has just left his office on Fifth Avenue, his mind likely focused on his blueprints, his upcoming weekend, or perhaps, his next victim. He has no idea that the people walking beside him, the people leaning against the buildings, and the people sitting in the parked cars are not ordinary New Yorkers. They are heavily armed, elite undercover detectives from the Gilgo Beach Task Force. And they have completely surrounded him. The authorities know they cannot risk a violent confrontation in one of the most densely populated areas on Earth. They need the element of absolute surprise. As Heuermann walks down the bustling sidewalk, completely oblivious, the signal is given. In a matter of seconds, plainclothes officers swarm him from every direction. Before he can even process what is happening, his arms are pinned behind his massive frame, and cold steel handcuffs lock around his wrists. Rex Heuermann, the phantom who haunted the shores of Long Island for over a decade, is finally in custody. There is no shootout. There is no dramatic chase. The monster is quietly pulled from the crowd and placed into an unmarked police vehicle, disappearing into the New York City traffic. But the arrest was only the beginning. As Heuermann was being driven to a secure interrogation room, a massive, highly coordinated operation was unfolding 30 miles away in the quiet, suburban neighborhood of Massapequa Park. For years, the residents of First Avenue had whispered about the Heuermann house. In a neighborhood filled with neatly trimmed lawns, bright siding, and modern renovations, Rex Heuermann's home was a glaring, decaying anomaly. The small, red, single-family house was overgrown with weeds. The roof was sagging, the paint was peeling, and the front porch looked like it was rotting away. Neighbors described it as the creepy house on the block, the kind of place kids would cross the street to avoid on Halloween. Little did they know, the reality of what lay inside was far worse than any neighborhood ghost story. Dozens of police cruisers, forensic vans, and mobile command centers flooded the quiet street. Crime scene tape was wrapped around the property, and investigators in full white hazmat suits began methodically moving in and out of the front door. The media descended on the neighborhood, broadcasting the raid live across the globe. The world was finally getting a look inside the lair of the Gilgo Beach killer. What investigators found inside was a psychological nightmare. The house was a labyrinth of clutter, floor to ceiling. It was a hoarder's paradise, filled with junk, old boxes, and suffocating dust. But the detectives were not there for the garbage. They were looking for trophies. Serial killers of this nature, highly organized, sadistic, and deeply obsessed with their crimes, rarely walk away empty-handed. They keep tokens. A piece of jewelry, a driver's license, an item of clothing. Something to help them relive the absolute power they felt at the moment of the kill. As the forensic teams dug through the filth, they made their way down a narrow set of stairs into the basement. And there, hidden beneath the decaying suburban home, they found it. Behind a heavy, reinforced door, Rex Heuermann had constructed a massive, walk-in vault. It was heavily secured, soundproofed, and completely hidden from the outside world. When the police breached the vault, they were stunned. Inside, they discovered a terrifying arsenal. Heuermann, who possessed permits for only a handful of weapons, had amassed a collection of over 280 firearms. There were handguns, assault rifles, and high-capacity magazines stacked floor to ceiling. But the guns were not the only things the police were looking for inside that vault. They were looking for the dark room where the horror happened. Because the bodies of the Gilgo Four were found wrapped in burlap and completely decomposed, the exact locations of their murders had never been determined. Did he bring them to this house? Did he lock them in this soundproof vault? The crime scene investigators brought in ground-penetrating radar, tearing up the backyard, scanning the concrete floors, and dismantling the plumbing to search for microscopic traces of blood, DNA, or human remains. The entire property was treated as a potential slaughterhouse. While the world focused on the horrors inside the house, another shocking revelation sent the true crime community into a frenzy. It involved Rex Heuermann's wife, Asa Ellerup. When the police revealed the DNA evidence that tied Heuermann to the burlap sacks, they dropped a bombshell. Rex's DNA was not the only biological material found on the victims. Investigators also found female hairs. Specifically, they found hairs belonging to Asa Ellerup wrapped around the bodies of 3 of the Gilgo Four victims. The internet exploded with theories. Was the wife involved? Did she know what her husband was doing? Was this a team of killers, acting together in the shadows? The task force quickly shut down the speculation, explaining a forensic phenomenon known as secondary transfer. Asa Ellerup was completely ruled out as a suspect. Travel records undeniably proved she was hundreds of miles away, out of the state, or out of the country every single time a murder took place. The terrifying reality was that Rex Heuermann had brought the victims into his own home, or used his own family's belongings to dispose of them. The female hairs found on the bodies were shed by his wife onto blankets, towels, or rolls of tape inside their house. When the house was empty, Rex used those exact items to bind and wrap the murdered women. He was so comfortable, so arrogant, that he didn't even bother to buy separate materials. He wrapped his victims in the very fabric of his own domestic life. When Asa Ellerup and her 2 children returned home from their vacations, they had no idea they were walking into a crime scene. When the police informed her of the charges against her husband of nearly 3 decades, her reaction was visceral. She was utterly blindsided. Her entire reality, her marriage, and her family's legacy were destroyed in a single afternoon. Within days of the arrest, she filed for divorce, her life completely shattered by the man she thought she knew. Rex Heuermann was officially charged with the murders of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. Months later, as the forensic evidence continued to mount, he was also charged with the murder of the 4th victim, Maureen Brainerd Barnes. But the authorities made one thing devastatingly clear. The Gilgo Four were just the beginning. The brush along Ocean Parkway held 11 bodies. And the task force was just getting started. The courtroom is a stark contrast to the dark, tangled brush of Gilgo Beach. Under the bright, sterile fluorescent lights of the Suffolk County Courthouse, Rex Heuermann stands before a judge. He is no longer the invisible ghost making taunting phone calls from Times Square. He is no longer the untouchable architect manipulating the skyline of Manhattan. He is prisoner number 238-1710. But as the prosecution reads the horrifying details of the murders, the strangulation, the burlap sacks, the calculated disposal of human beings, Heuermann does not look down. He does not cry. He does not show a single ounce of remorse or fear. He stares straight ahead, his face a completely blank, emotionless mask. To the families of the victims sitting just feet away from him, his coldness is the final, agonizing proof that they are looking into the eyes of a true psychopath. He pleads not guilty to all charges. Despite his plea, the mountain of evidence against him continues to grow. As forensic teams dive deeper into his seized electronics, they uncover what prosecutors describe as a how-to manual for serial murder. Deleted files recovered from his hard drives reveal that Heuermann obsessively researched ways to avoid detection, how to wipe digital footprints, and how to effectively clean crime scenes. The prosecution's case is a masterclass in modern forensics, weaving together burner phones, pizza crust DNA, and the tragic timelines of 4 young women who were simply trying to survive. But as the world focuses on the Gilgo Four, a massive, terrifying shadow still hangs over Ocean Parkway. Because Rex Heuermann has been charged with 4 murders. But 11 bodies were pulled from that brush. What about Jessica Taylor, whose remains were scattered across 2 different towns? What about Valerie Mack? What about the unidentified woman known only as Peaches, whose tattoo was the only clue to her existence? What about the female toddler, and the unidentified Asian male? Serial killers of this magnitude do not usually begin their crimes in their mid-40s, and they certainly do not just stop. Criminologists and FBI profilers believe that Heuermann's hunting timeline could extend back into the 1990s. Task forces across New York, New Jersey, and even as far as Las Vegas, where Heuermann owned a timeshare, are now pulling out boxes of cold cases. They are looking for women who vanished in the night, women whose files have been gathering dust for decades. The Gilgo Beach Task Force has made it clear, the investigation into Rex Heuermann is not over. It has only just begun. And then, there is the tragic, haunting irony of Shannon Gilbert. It was Shannon's panicked, 23-minute 911 call in May 2010 that brought the police to Oak Beach. It was the search for Shannon that led Officer John Malia and his K-9 partner to discover the burlap sacks. Shannon Gilbert inadvertently unearthed a serial killer's graveyard. She forced the world to look at a stretch of highway they had ignored for years. Yet, officially, the Suffolk County Police Department still maintains that Shannon's death was a tragic accident, that she ran into the marsh in a state of paranoia and died of exposure or drowning. Her family, backed by independent autopsies, refuses to accept this. They believe she was running from someone. They believe she was murdered. Whether Shannon fell victim to the same monster, a different predator, or the treacherous elements of the marsh, one undeniable truth remains: without Shannon Gilbert, Rex Heuermann might still be walking the streets of Manhattan today. She was the catalyst for justice, even if her own justice remains fiercely debated. The arrest of the Gilgo Beach architect forces us to confront a terrifying reality. We want our monsters to look like monsters. We want them to be outcasts, living in the shadows, easily identifiable by their terrifying demeanor. But the truth is far more dangerous. The most successful predators hide in plain sight. They wear expensive suits. They commute on the same trains as we do. They design the buildings we work in. They smile at us in the grocery store, and they go home to their families in quiet, suburban neighborhoods. Rex Heuermann used his normalcy as a shield, weaponizing his ordinary life to get away with the unthinkable. As the heavy iron doors of the maximum security prison close behind him, the families of Melissa, Megan, Amber, and Maureen can finally breathe. The ghost of Gilgo Beach has a name, and he is locked in a cage. But as you drive down a lonely, dark highway at night, surrounded by nothing but trees and shadows, you have to wonder, who else is hiding behind the mask of an ordinary life? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the darkness. If you made it this far, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Rex Heuermann is responsible for the rest of the Gilgo 11? And what do you believe really happened to Shannon Gilbert? Stay vigilant, stay safe, and always question what lies beneath the surface. Don't forget to subscribe to Case 404 for more investigations into the unknown. We'll see you in the next case.